Today, we're going to be looking at all the options to help with client onboarding. So we're going to be looking at the client invite process, RightExpress plans, tasks, and more. I do want to mention this is going to have quite a bit in it. So even if you already have a set up client base, you've been in RightCapital for many years, there's definitely going to be some stuff in here that's still going to be helpful to you. So again, even if you just started with the program or you've been with us for a while, there's always something that can help with onboarding, new clients or even old clients from different softwares. So we're going to jump into all of that. Before we actually jump in, just some quick housekeeping items. First off, the session is being recorded. We'll send you a copy after the webinar is over. So if you miss anything or you're only half listening or you get pulled away for a different meeting or anything like that, don't worry. You'll get a link. It's about 30 minutes to an hour after the close of the webinar. You'll get a link with the recording. It'll also be available on the Help Center. So again, if you're going to be watching this with the intention of like working through a new client plan, just give me your attention for now. Try and absorb as much as you can. And then again, this will be available later if you need it. So just something to keep in mind. We're also going to have a Q&A session at the very end of the webinar, permitting for time. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Just a note though, the way Zoom works, I'm not able to see questions as they come up. I can only see them once I actually open a dedicated window for it, which I can't get to right now. So if you do ask a question, just make sure you actually say what it is you're asking. If you say something like, wait, can you do that again? I'm not going to be able to understand what you were talking about. So just something to keep in mind, just make sure you phrase your questions like that. And with that, we should be all set. So let me share my screen for everybody and we will get started. All right. So for today, we're going to be mostly in the advisor portal here. So obviously, the whole point is creating new client plans, but we're going to be looking at a lot of the options around it. We're not going to be really diving deep on like one plan. We will look at something with that later. But there's a lot to do with client onboarding, so we'll just get started. Now, the first thing I want to look at is actually a pretty new feature. I think the first iteration of this we released was back in, I want to say November, so still recent. And it's definitely been very helpful for people who are new to the system, and I definitely want to go over that today. So if I actually start in the advisor portal, and this is the first page you should see when logging in, by the way. I'm on the client tab, so this should be pretty similar to what you see when you log in. What I'm going to do is go over to this 3-dot icon over here in between help and the folder icon. I'm going to open that up, go to integrations right here. And then on this page, now this is normally where our regular integration page is, and I'll get to this in a second, but specifically what I wanted to start with today is if I go to the top left right here where it says integration partners, there's a drop down, and you can switch that to data import. And if I switch that, we have a couple different options here. So this is definitely a pretty important feature. So the way this works is effectively if you were either an eMoney or a MoneyGuide Pro user, or I'm not sure if that's how they call it, MoneyGuide, MoneyGuide Pro, either one. If you're a user with either one of those, depending on what access you have, you may be able to download reports from those softwares and then use them to upload clients to our software instead. So they work pretty similar. Obviously, what they may need in the report is going to be a little bit different. So one thing I'm going to say right up front, if you're curious about what you actually need in a report like that in order to import, I do definitely recommend checking out these Help Center articles. Again, I'm not going to go over both of them today. I'm going to stick with MoneyGuide because I think it's a little bit more of an in-depth process. But if I go to the Help Center, I can click that link right here. It will open our Help Center, which has all the details on how this works, along with the file requirements. It's going to be different between the two of them. So definitely, if you think this is a good idea for yourself, you can see getting a lot of use out of this. Definitely just check out the Help Center. Just make sure you understand what you actually need in the report in order to get it sent over. But anyway, with that in mind, how does this work? Well, essentially, you're just going to upload a report and you're going to bring the info in, but I'll actually go through that process. So pretty simple. Once you're here, let's say I'm trying to upload a MoneyGuide PDF report. What I can do is very simple. Just go to this button in the very top right here where it says Upload Report. I'm going to click that. Now it's going to open this kind of normal, I guess, file upload option. This is similar to what you would see if you're trying to upload something to the vault. And I can actually just drag and drop the file I want in. So bear with me one second. I'm just going to find my file here. Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to drag and drop this in. And it's going to start uploading. So again, What it's going to do, it's effectively going to take this report I got in this case from MoneyGuide. It's going to scan it. Once it identifies this is actually a report, it can ask me whether I want to import it into a new household or import it into an existing household. These two aren't that different. Obviously, the idea is, I can import this as a brand new household, or I can just add any of the information into one I already have. Doesn't matter too much, just depends on whether you've already started putting the clients into your folder already, or into your plan, I should say. I can press upload, and it will start taking all that info and processing it so it can actually be uploaded. Now, this may take a couple minutes depending on how large the report is or how good the quality of the report is. That can actually have an effect on it. So while this does its thing, I'm going to quickly just jump back over to the integrations page. We'll let this download. It takes a couple minutes, and when we're done with the integrations page, it should be all set. So super quickly, I'm just going to jump over to integration partners. While we wait for that, what I just want to talk about with integration partners. Now, this is something we go over in the Creating Your First Plan webinar. So this is one of the things we first introduce people to when they're using the software. But especially for client onboarding, especially if you're a new user for RightCapital, we absolutely recommend that you just go through and just check this list to see if there's any custodians on here you use or anything like that. The reason being, this can just make the onboarding process a lot easier. So a common example is you're a brand new user to RightCapital, and you say, hey, I have a ton of clients that use Fidelity. Maybe that's what I recommend, whatever system you use. What you can do is if you actually connect to the integration, so in this case, if I went through the process to actually connect to Fidelity, and as a note, if you're curious about how any of these processes work, every single one of these will actually have the instructions laid out right here. But if I go to the Help Center article, there's additional instructions on how these work. So that can definitely help you get set up. But the point is, once it's actually done, what this will allow you to do is typically, depending on the integration, bring in accounts from that institution into RightCapital. So for example, I can go through the process of using the Fidelity integration, get that set up. And then when it's done, again, assuming I have assets or the clients have assets custodied with them that I have, management ability over, what I can do is then import those into the plan automatically, right? So again, I don't have an example I can use right here because I don't have these integrations set up. But basically what I could do then is I could actually go into the plan, pull up Fidelity under the link account option, and actually just add their account from there. And it would then just show up as an account in their plan. So definitely very important. Again, all these integrations are different. They don't all do the same thing. Fidelity might bring in different assets than Schwab does and vice versa, right? So definitely, if you're interested in any one of these integrations, I would definitely just dive in, check what they do. Not all of them import accounts specifically. There are some such as, where's a red tail here? There we go. Such as Redtail, they actually bring in household like contact information and personal info like names, date of birth, things like that. So especially if you're brand new, this can be very, very helpful. Especially when you're starting a new client plan, they can just start with all their names, date of births, basic contact info. That can definitely save a lot of time. So again, you don't have to use these, but I really like to shout these out for onboarding because especially if you're, again, brand new, you're bringing in tons of clients, maybe dozens at a time. These can absolutely save you hours of work. Even the time saved on one account or one plan that has 5 accounts, not having to manually input those can definitely save you some good time. So just something I want to make sure everyone was aware of. But anyway, so moving back to data import, what I can do here, in this case, this is actually a good example of what happens when they're unrecognized. I think this might be before we actually did the update since this is a little bit old. But ultimately, 2 things will happen. And actually, this is a good example I can use. So in this case, I uploaded the report. It's labeled as unrecognized. The reason is it's telling me I need certain information. I believe this is technically before the update came out. This was a beta version I was using, which probably explains that. So in this case, this one was able to be recognized, but it will tell me why. So in this case, I'm missing one of these. I'm missing the table of contents, personal information, and summary. So I could go in, make sure they're on there. Now, ultimately, if they were on there, I can actually use this other one as an example. If I go over to the eMoney PDF report, right, I actually already have 2 in here. What it would do is essentially upload these, allow me to just select which items I want to import over, and then they're just available in the plan. And I can even open this plan up and just take a look. So for example, all these cards I'm seeing here, I have not edited this plan, are all just pulled over from that report. So in this case, it's saying, hey, you had a card in your eMoney plan that said you're contributing $5,000 a year to your traditional IRA. So we're going to import that right into the plan, right? Pretty simple. Again, there can be certain issues with the file like we saw. Again, it's not something that doesn't happen. However, they are uncommon. And ultimately, if you do run into an issue, you can actually just reach out to our support team. They are used to situations like this. There are different weird minutia that can happen with these plans once they get exported. For example, eMoney, we need certain details from the eMoney report. Again, this is listed in the Help Center, but if any one of those are missing, it may show up as unrecognized like the other one did. That being said, you can send them a report. They can pretty easily from there tell what's in the report and be able to get it uploaded. So just something to keep in mind. But ultimately, if you are coming from one of these softwares, if you're brand new, definitely very important to use one of these. This can definitely save a lot of time. Again, when I'm looking at something like this household, right, there are tons of different details in here. You know, if I go through, for example, income, the family cards, all the way out to things like expenses, if I had to add all of these cards manually, that could potentially take quite a while, especially if I'm going off of paper or using a different tab or looking at a different window or something like that. So this can definitely save a lot of time. But that's effectively what I have for that. Again, you don't have to use this, but especially for new users, and that's why I'm spending some time with it. Definitely very, very important to getting clients set up. Now, with all that being said, we'll move on to something that's a little bit more for everybody. This is usually for new users, but we'll move on to templates. So, lot to cover here. So I'm going to try and take this as many different points as I can. So for templates, there's a few here that are very helpful. The first I'm going to start with is onboarding. So with onboarding templates, the way these work is that this is essentially what will be in the initial data entry when a client plan is created, right? So for example, when I go make a new client, if I made a new one right now, it would bring me to the 6 steps of data entry, right? And that's what these are. So when I log in, I will usually, create a new plan. They will start with these 6 sections, which is usually what makes up the data entry process. Now, for whatever reason, you may not think that's sufficient, or maybe that's even too much for certain clients. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you are pulling in clients' account information from something like Fidelity. Well, if you're already bringing over their account information, you may not even want them to worry about inputting their net worth, right? Maybe you still need them to go in and input their income and their savings, their expenses, maybe go over some goals, but you've already done the net worth work. You don't want them going in there and modifying it for no reason. So what I can actually do is, let's say, I'll use this as the new template, right? This one was already available. What I can do is say, hey, this is going to be my, let's say, Fidelity client onboarding, right? Save the name, and then I can actually just uncheck the net worth, right? And the idea being, hey, if I ever have a client log in and begin their data entry process, that's what I'm having them do for the data entry. I now have a version of their onboarding or their 6 steps of data entry that's actually tailored to them. So I've actually removed net worth. They no longer have to do that. When they log in, they will no longer see net worth available to them. As an additional example, there are 2 more we can add in. So in this case, what I can do is say, hey, when they enter the 6 steps of data entry, I also want them to have the vault. I want them to be able to send files to me without having finished all the data entry. Maybe they hit something like expenses and they're getting confused. They're not sure what they want to put in there. They need help. You can tell them, hey, just throw something in the vault. I'll take care of it later. Don't worry about it, right? So definitely another good thing to add in there. And lastly, again, you don't have to, but if this is something you're interested in, definitely something you can add. You can also add in the risk questionnaire. So if I click on this, now again, a lot of things that can happen with this. Obviously, you can upload your own risk questionnaires, things like that. I won't get into that for today. But what you can do here is just ensure that, hey, when the plan is first made, when they're still in that, again, 6 steps of data entry, you can actually bring up their risk assessment, make sure they get that done at the same time. Before we had this onboarding template, what you would have to do is actually start the plan and then go in and assign them the risk template after you've made the plan. When it's set up like this, you can actually just make sure, like, hey, from the get-go, when I make a client plan, this should already be enabled, right? I can actually choose which is risk assessment I want them to do. In this case, I only have one, so that'll be the one I choose. I can also say, hey, make an additional assessment for the co-client, right? Both of them should take it, not just one of them. In this case, I'll just leave that off for now. So ultimately, it's just making sure like, hey, what is going to be in their plan when it is first created in terms of the initial data entry process. Again, there's a lot of ways you can do this. This is the common example I've seen is just making sure like, hey, at the end of the day, they're not doing something like net worth because I'm already bringing that up. Maybe you just want them to have access to the vault in addition to those other items. Whatever it may be, the point is that they start with this from the get-go and we're not inputting all this detail after the plan's already been created. The point here is saving time. If you only add a client once every few months, this isn't a big deal. But if you maybe, are coming in for the first time, you're inputting a lot of people at once, or you have, I guess, like a recruitment time, and you're pulling in a lot of clients at once. Maybe you do like a big type of event or something to advertise your services, and you get a bunch of signups within the same month or something like that. This can definitely be very helpful. So again, it's just another instance of just trying to save you time in that initial onboarding process. So for this one, I'm actually going to press save. Now, we can make this the default for a client group moving forward. I'll get to that in a little bit. But first, I want to hit on two more points before we get to that, because I do think they're important before you start setting up actual clients. So I definitely want to hit on these. The first I'll go over super quickly is for Express. Now, we're going to go over this in more detail later. I'll actually go through what an Express plan looks like. But just so you're aware, there is a template for Express plans. So depending on what you want certain clients to be doing, you can set this up ahead of time. Again, if you don't know what Right Express Access is yet, we'll get to that. Just making you aware that there is a template to set these up ahead of time. Additionally, we have tasks. So this is where we get a little bit more complicated because I'm going to jump between tasks right here and RightFlows. And I'll go over the differences a little bit. I'm not going to go super in depth. We only have so much time, but I'll try and go over kind of the pros and cons of each and what you might want to be using depending on what your processes are, how many people are on your team, that type of thing. So real simple. What is a task? Well, very simply, if you go into a client plan, and actually, maybe I'll use this as an example. If I go to client super quickly, let's say I'm going to be working on the Joe Jones plan. This is actually one of the ones that was imported from eMoney, so I can use this as an example. So let's say they're in their data entry process. I've done all this. They're all done. I'll press complete, and we've made it to the end of the planning process. If I go to dashboard right here in the top left, and this will be available in any client plan. If I go to dashboard and then go to tasks, it's this item right here, right? If I go to tasks, what I can do is actually add a task effectively, or kind of like an instruction to add to the plan that will actually notify people attached to the plan. So for example, I'm in their plan. Let's say I just need them to upload tax documents. It's the beginning of the year. We want to make sure they get this done before, April, right? So what I can do is I can actually go in. I'll start with, the due date. I can go in and say, hey, I'm going to need this for let's say March. Let's be a little conservative. Let's say, hey, we want it by March 15th. We want to make sure we have time to actually go over this, right? It's going to be a one-time task. I can actually set the people assigned to the task. So for example, if you have a team, you can actually assign this to multiple people. I'm not going to go over all of that, but maybe you have an assistant you have specifically. Maybe I work with my assistant, John Smith. I want to make sure he's notified of this as well. So if we hit the due date and they still don't have a tax document uploaded, that we can actually, have him reach out and assign them, right? I can put that in there. I can also just assign the people in the plan. So for example, Joe Jones is the main client. I can actually just assign him. I can also assign his co-client, right? Make sure we're all set. And I'll even assign myself, right? So I'll get notified as well when they don't actually go through with that, right? So I can press that, exit out. I can set a priority. In this case, we're pretty far out. We've got a couple months, so I'll set this to a low priority. I can always go in and change this later. So if we're getting to like March 1st, it's still not done, I can set it to a high priority. And I can put in the task. In this case, I'll just say upload tax documents. Put in like one of those by date listed or something like that, right? Doesn't really matter. I can set whether it's visible to the client. In this case, I really want this to be shown to the client. I could set it to not visible and then like only assign perhaps like myself or an assistant. That way we have a notification and a task waiting for us in the system and not the client. You don't have to do that. Again, can just make it easier to make sure like, hey, have I gotten all this work done for a client? Did I miss anything? As opposed to like adding something to your schedule and it gets lost in the calendar. So this can definitely help. In this case, I want the client to see this, so I'm going to leave it open. and then press save. And effectively what we have here is now we have a task that's assigned to 3 people. They can go in, upload their W-2 into the vault, and then check that off. Something I can also do if I wanted to, I can even add additional details here. Something I see that's pretty common is like, hey, if you need help, contact, X, right? Or check out this video. We've had advisors, for example, who have actually made like their own content, kind of like walking their clients through how to use parts of the system. This is where you could link a video like that, right? So you could go through, set up something like that, and you're all set. And that will also be in the task. Now, depending on their notification settings, they will actually get emailed about this. That's, again, a different issue. You can adjust their notification settings. I might go over that at the end if we have time. But ultimately, this is now in the plan, and multiple people can jump in, do this, and then check it off, right? I can even go in, press that, complete, done, right? All set. Now, why do I bring this up? Why isn't this important? Well, there's 2 main ways we can make this much easier for onboarding. So the first method, if I'm back and we go right back to tasks, right, or back to templates, I can go to templates, tasks, and I can actually set up templates for, tasks. So in this case, what I can do, I can go in, let's say this is the, I don't know, tax template or something like that. Just use this as an example, check it off, add a task. I can say, hey, now in this case, it is going to set it to a number of days because the idea is this is something we want to do later. Actually, you know what? Let me change this up a little bit. Let's do this as the onboarding template. It's a little bit more on the note for us, right? On the nose, I should say. There we go. Onboarding template. Okay, so I can go to add task. I can set it to, this needs to be done within, let's just say 30 days, right? You have a month. We'll assign it to the client. So whoever we actually assign this template to, that will be the main client, is the one that gets notified. I can also put myself, right? So I will get notified once this is added as well. Priority, I'll just set to low. Maybe it's not super important, and just say, please upload, X tax documents to the vault. And let's say, actually, we'll do another one, right? So I'll press save. That's one task. And I can even add another and say this is also due in 30 days. Sign it to the client and myself like I did before, right? Set another low priority. And let's say this one is, I don't know. Let's say input income information. Again, just some basics, right? Press save. And now we actually have 2 tasks that are just all set up right here. Now, why is this important? Well, the idea that this is important is that we can actually make sure that when a client plan is created, they just start with these tasks right off the bat, right? So if I go to the 3 dots icon here and then go to client settings right here, and then lastly, client groups. So if you notice 3 dots, client settings, client groups, this is all in the advisor portal. I actually have a list of different clients I have on here. Now, there's a couple default. You'll start with like existing clients. You'll have prospect clients. I've actually added an additional one here for express clients. For today's example, I'm just going to make a new one and say these are my onboarding clients or something like that, right? Doesn't really matter. You can have just about as many of these as you want. Onboarding clients, save the name. I have a new client group here. And what I can actually do is go to edit. So if you see where it says default templates, I can go to edit. And I can actually apply all of these. So as you remember, I also had an onboarding template. I can also put that in here. So this is super important. So I can make sure, hey, at the very beginning, they're just going to start with these. Now I can put that in. Once they're actually added, I can just add the task in as soon as they're done with the 6 steps of data entry. But there's one more way to get tasks into their plan. And this is a little bit more automated. Just a little bit, make sure they start from the get-go. So there's 2 ways to do it. This is how you get the templates in here from the start. So again, I'll mention here as well, if you have other templates you want to put in, maybe you need, a default estate checklist for a client to start with, or planning access, or whatever it is, you can also set that up here. I also looked at the default express access template earlier. In this case, I'll even set that to full express access, right? Very simple. Press save. I now have a client group in there with those already in there. Now, I went over task templates, so I could go in, make a client for this, add that in there, but there's one more way to do it, which is RightFlows. Now, RightFlows is a little complicated. I'm not going to go over everything that RightFlows can do today. This is actually something where we recommend talking to your sales contact before you jump into it, because usually this is sold separately as part of your subscription. It's not always necessary, which is why we recommend talking to your sales contact first. You might not get a lot of use out of this, but someone else might get a lot of use out of it, and it's very worth it. We don't want to sell you something you're not going to use and then you just eventually cancel. That's not good for anybody. So that's definitely something we recommend. There's two main points to RightFlows, though, that can make it very helpful. The first, as you can kind of see, might be a little bit obvious, but it's just also a place where you can see all tasks within the system. So if I go to RightFlows and tasks, very simple, I can actually just see all tasks that are available, right? So I don't have to go into a specific client plan. I can just go in, this is already available. I can see I have a number of different plans here with tasks available. Some of these might be, yeah, some of these are definitely overdue, right? This one's already all the way from March 2024, right? I can see what's coming up right now and then any in the future, right? So ultimately, I can go in and just see, hey, is there anything that really needs to get done? Anything that's coming up? What have I completed? Just make sure that we didn't accidentally mark something correct by accident. So we can do all that. However, the second point of this is that we can actually do something called workflows. Now, again, there's a lot of minutia to this. I'm not going to go into detail on every single thing that workflows can do. I'm just going to hit the important points for onboarding, because there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. If you can see, there's a lot of different workflows on here, things like quarterly reviews, stuff pertaining to RMDs, Roth conversions, all sort of things like that. But there is one in this case for setting up a new client. So how does this work? Well, if I go to the templates here, there's a number of different templates in here, including some default ones with something like new client workflow, right? So if I actually go here, I'll just enable this. So I can actually see, hey, these are people that have a workflow. They're brand new clients, and they're actually going through these initial steps to become, a fully onboarded client to the system, right? So if I actually click into one of these, I'll just use this as an example. In this case, this is a preset number of tasks that this person has to get through in order to be considered fully onboarded. So you can see there's a number of different options here. They have to get through this section. They have to complete task under the initial meeting. Then we get to the data gathering section. There's a ton of different tasks in here that they have to go through. So they actually have to upload documents. They need to create an account with some sort of login. Maybe they have to make an account with Fidelity or something like that. They have to review their own data entry. They got to review their client documents. Some of these might be for the advisor and the client. So in this case, these bottom three are actually for the advisor. So I would actually, if this was a workflow for one of my clients, I would have to go in and check these off and say like, hey, I checked their data entry, looks good. I made sure they have their documents uploaded and all client information is complete. I would have to go in there and actually check these off, right? You can also add notes within a workflow. So you can go in and say, hey, as a note, I could say, let's say, I don't know, client is having an issue with, bank login, may need to circle back or something like that, right? I can put something in there, press save, it shows up all set, and I can delete it just like that as well. So you can keep track of where they are in the process past just adding more tasks. And this would go all the way to the end when we're actually creating a future financial plan, figuring out what's going with their account. I can check these as well. There's future goals in here you can't actually get to till these are done, right? I can also activate it ahead of time if I need to, but generally you want to kind of go in order. I'll just click through these so you can see them. So why is this helpful? Well, the first note is that as you can kind of see, this is much more in depth than just something like a task template. So if I go back super quickly to task templates, while I can go in and set up templates with a number of tasks in it, workflows is kind of this plus an extra step. It's a little bit more complicated, but it has a lot more going for it. Whereas like, hey, if I just have a client that needs to do like 5 things for me and then we're all set, you can use a task template. However, if I have maybe like a larger team, I work with dozens of different clients. This is very complicated for me to set up and keep track of. This is where this can become very helpful. And again, the note I want to make is with multiple teams. Something that makes this really important is if you're in a larger firm, maybe you have multiple advisors that all have their own assistants, right? They all have their own books of business, but maybe there's a little bit of overlap sometimes. This can be very important because you can say, hey, maybe, my coworker, another advisor in the firm, John, he's out, right? he's in the middle of an onboarding process with this client. He's not going to be available for 2 weeks. So I need to know where they were and what they need to get done. So when he gets back, this is all set. This is the main purpose of something like workflows, right? Especially with onboarding. Now, again, there are different workflows in here, right? So if I go back and I, get rid of this filter, there's dozens of these, right? There's ones for quarterly reviews, required minimum distributions. They need to get that settled. Trying to set up Roth conversions, things like that, right? There's a ton of these. I could go through a bunch of these different examples, right? A lot of them, if you notice, have to do with new clients because that tends to be the most popular, right? You can add a workflow as well. So you can actually, for in this case, if I have a new client, what I can do is I can add the client in and then just go in. Let's say this is new client workflow. This starts today. This is going to be one time. Select which client should be in there, and then you're all set, right? I can even track which advisor should be connected to it. So once you've actually created a plan, you can just assign them the workflow, and then we all of a sudden have dozens of these tasks they can get through. We know where they are in the process. The client can keep informed on where they should be. They get warnings and everything they need to get done. Advisors and assistants know where they should be and can get things done. So again, I'm kind of just hitting on the bird's eye view of how workflows really work. But again, the larger your team, the more helpful like RightFlows can become. Again, if you're just a solo advisor, maybe you have one assistant and a few tasks should be fine. Again, go crazy. There's nothing wrong with this. But RightFlows is just once you start reaching very high client counts and you're bringing in lots of people at once, and maybe you just have a lot of different people you work with, those can be very helpful. So again, not going to go super in depth. All this stuff is on the Help Center too. So if you are interested in looking into something like RightFlows and workflows, definitely check out the Help Center, contact support, talk with a salesperson, see if it's right for you. Again, we do not want to sell it to you if we don't think you're going to use it. So we want to make sure that you actually seem like you're a good use case for it. But definitely some important stuff to keep in mind. So very important. One last thing I want to get to before we jump to actual client creation. Some of the options for that is I did kind of get there quickly. But there are multiple different options for actually adding clients. And before I jump into the actual like creating a client or creating a Express client, there is one thing we can do to make this process a lot easier and take the pressure off of you as the advisor in terms of creating clients. So if I go to this three dot icon here and then go to client settings and again, client groups, right? Now, what I looked at here before was I made a group and then I edited the default templates available to it, right? So I was able to go in, I could set what their express access is, I can set what their onboarding template is, all that good stuff, right? Press save, we're done. Now, what I can also do is make it so that I, the advisor, does not actually have to create the clients myself. What I can do is generate something called a leads URL or a leads link, which allows me to place that on an email, on my website, and then clients who are interested in my services or maybe interested in becoming a client or whatever can actually use that URL, start the plan themselves, input some basic data. You then have access to that plan and can actually reach out to them from there. So it's a very good tool for client outreach and even advertisement. It gets them involved with the planning journey. So that way they can actually go in, put all their data in, and go, cool, I added my data in. Hopefully I'll hear back from them. Maybe that makes them then reach out and say like, hey, I've been using this. I'm really interested in learning more. You already have their information then. Maybe it advertises them. They just had a free, maybe they went to some type of presentation, saw you, go to your website. Oh, I can input my information already. Again, there's dozens of ways you can use this. You can use it as an outreach email. You put it on your website, use it in presentations. Again, tons of different uses. I've seen people use it as QR codes. You can actually link the URL to a QR code, put it in advertisements, whatever you want to do. But the point is, it gets the client involved from the get-go, even if you haven't even met with them before. So it's very important. The way it works, super simple. Once you create the client group, right? In this case, I have onboarding clients, where it says leads link, just press generate. So press generate, it will actually make a link. So in this case, this is the leads URL. I can actually copy paste this, right? I can put this on my website, put it in an email, whatever you want to do. Again, really helpful example I saw was putting it into a QR code, and then you can actually put that on like physical advertisements or something like that, even business cards. Very helpful. And then just let them know like, hey, is this going to be full planning your express? Again, we'll get to that in just a moment. and then you're all good, right? I can even track who has been signing up with this link. What time did they do it? Was this the same date that I did a presentation, or is it coming in pretty steadily? You can see the total number of signups. So again, you don't have to use this feature, but if this is something that seems interesting to you, it's definitely worth trying. Just because, especially with prospect clients, it can be difficult to maybe get that final, maybe not sale, but final push and becoming a full client. This is a great way to get them introduced. If they're willing to take the time to put in their information, it's probably more likely they're going to reach out, right? So that can definitely weed out people that maybe aren't super interested from the get-go as well. But either way, very helpful. Definitely something I recommend for onboarding that can definitely make that process a lot easier. Because at the end of the day, you're not making the client, right? You might just be cleaning up the information they already put in, and then you're all set. So very helpful. I'll press save here. Now, that'll bring us to probably the most important note for onboarding, which obviously is actually creating the plan. We went through a lot of different settings to help with making the client process or adding a client process much easier. So things like creating templates to make sure they're just set up from the beginning, making it possible so they are the one that can actually just start their plan, importing their data through something like like an eMoney report, right? We've gone through a lot of that process. We haven't actually added a client yet, which is kind of the important part, right? So the thing I wanted to focus on here, if I jump back over to clients, right, is there are multiple ways to actually add a client into the system, right? So if I go to the top left here, you'll notice there's two buttons. The first is just add a new client. This one will show off very quickly. It's super simple. I can just go in, add in a client. Let's say this is John Wayne. I don't know. A little bit before my time, but I'll put that in anyway. I can put his email address. I can set, this is actually a brand new feature from this week. You can set from the get-go what client group they are in. This is actually very important because if you have default templates, you can make sure they have it from the get-go, right? So I could set him to onboarding clients, set, whether they should be shared with teammates or private, press start, and they're a client, right? They'll start with the information. If you actually notice, they have the vault and risk options available from the get-go because of that template we started earlier. I can press complete, jump over to tasks. Let me jump over to dashboard, tasks, add a task, use my task template from earlier, right? Boom, set the due date. In this case, I'll set it to, I don't know, I'll say end of February, right? Press save. They've got the task, right? So if that's all you need, great. If you add one client every couple weeks, great. You've seen that. You've got this process. You're all set. Again, once you set up the templates, this is very easy. I did two things there, and they're basically ready to go. Put in their data, right? Very simple. Now, other than that, there is one more way we can actually create a client, which is kind of important, right? So that's the basic way. If you've used the software for any amount of time, that should seem familiar. Again, all we've done throughout this webinar, if that's what you're interested in, is just make that process a little bit easier. There is one more way to add a client in. This is somewhat recent. I think we added this the second half of last year, so some people might not be super familiar with this, but you can actually add in something called an express client. And what this is a much simpler way to actually get clients started. This is really good for prospect clients. So people that just kind of need to see quick return on what info they're putting in and see what that does for the plan. So the way this can work, let's say I'm going to make this plan from scratch just so we can see what it looks like. I'm going to put in, let's say this is Bruce Wayne, right? Whatever, we'll use that as the name. I'll go to more options, make sure they're part of that onboarding clients template. I can even set what their express access is going to be from the beginning. In this case, I'll just use the full express access. Now, one other thing I'll mention, you can invite clients to do their own data entry if you put in email. I'm not going over that today, but just something you can be aware of. And I'll press start. So when I actually load into this, the express access is going to look quite different from the beginner data entry, right? The traditional, I guess, standard client data entry, right? So when I jump in, the first thing you'll notice is that the 6 steps are not there. In fact, right now it's only 3, right? And what these are very much, it's pretty much the bare minimum, I should say, the bare minimum on what you'll need to get info on a specific section of their plan. And I'll go over these in detail, but essentially what you can do is set, hey, what is most important to this client? In this case, let's say the only thing this client really cares about understanding is their social security, right? That's all they're interested in learning about. What I could do is make an express plan for them, which is solely focused on that one item. What this does is vastly reduces the amount of data entry needed. You don't need to worry about half the stuff you would in a full plan because we're only worried about this one point, right? So when I go to the data entry process, I need to know who they are, what's their birthday, what's their residence state, how old do they plan on getting. Press save. Same thing for the co-client. Go to basic information. As you can see, there's a lot less information here, right? So here it's just going to ask me for their retirement ages, right? Let's say 67 for both. Press save. We'll go to salary. In this case, I'll just put in a basic salary for both. Let's say Bruce is making 150. This client's, let's just say they're also making 150, right? Keep it easy. Press save. I can go to Social Security here, right? Click that. Set the details on what they're expecting for Social Security. So I can say, hey, they plan on filing at 67 or at their date of retirement. I'll just stick with FRA for this one. Go to the estimated benefit amount. Now, there's a few different options for this, but if you're familiar at all with our system, this is the exact same options you would have available in a full plan. Again, it's just one of the only options available here. I'll use simple estimate for this example just to keep things easy. Press save. And then when I go to next, this is already available. So again, why is this helpful? Especially with prospects, if they're coming in and they're more focused on a single issue, again, they're like, hey, look, I'm just concerned with Social Security. That's the thing I'm really focused on. I'm just trying to get more results on that. How can you help me? This is a great way to do it because you need a fraction of the amount of information you would need in a full plan, and we just have results available, right? I can say, hey, based on the information I have available, it's actually better if you wait until 70 in this case, right? That would make it better. I can also see, if I go to cumulative, right, that you will actually end up making more money with the optimal strategy of waiting until 70 at age 80. So if you think you're not going to live that long, it's actually better to go with filing at 67. So, here's some basic information for you. You also get the summary that'll have the options available to them, what will make them the most money in the long run. And that's it. That's kind of the point. Again, we don't have a full plan for them. We didn't get all their information, but if this is all they care about, we have results for them. And that took us, obviously I just put in random numbers, but I mean, even if you had them in the room with you or on a call, that might take less than 10 minutes to just say, hey, what do you guys make? When do you plan on retiring? And, when do you plan on filing? That's it, right? That's basically all the information we put in and we got results. Very simple. This is for Social Security. If I go down the line, there's a bunch of these, right? So I can actually see how ready are they for retirement. The information I already put in will already be in here, right? So if I actually change his age by 1 year, let's say it's 1969 instead of 1970, right? Press save. This will be the same on every other result I get. So if I go to Social Security again, go to step 1, he will also be 57 here. So if you do input this for multiple, you don't have to recreate it in every single one. This information will carry over. But anyway, if I go back to retirement, add basic information about you. Now, obviously, retirement needs to care about a lot more. However, again, some of these are already figured out. We already know their retirement ages. We already know what they're doing with Social Security. I can do the rest, right? So I can go in. Oh, we also have salary. I can say, hey, for invested assets, again, I'm just going to use random numbers here. Let's say they have 500,000 taxable. Let's say 350 tax deferred, maybe 100,000 tax free. I'll just duplicate this for both, just make it real easy. Right? Simple. I can put in a basic investment allocation. Now, this is for the portfolio. We're not going to do this for every single account separately, but let's just say in general, they're at a 60-40. That's pretty basic. Press save. Same thing for savings. I'll just put in what they're putting in. Again, I'm going to use random numbers here. Just keep it simple. Tax-free, let's just say that's 5,000, right? Again, I'm not going to go super in-depth here. I'll just put this at 10,000 for all of them. Press save. Retirement expenses, what they actually plan on spending. Again, pretty simple. Let's just say it's going to be $4,000 a month. Again, I'm just using random numbers for the sake of time. I could even go into things like their retirement health costs or LTC. They might tell me they're just not interested in even thinking about this, in which case I can just delete it, right? Takes it away from the plan. I do have additional options available, so I can go and add in specific goals. So for example, maybe one of their kids is having a wedding. I can put that in, say, okay, they got to put in $10,000 for their kid's wedding on, maybe next year, right? 2027 is when they're getting married. So I'll give them a $10,000 gift for the wedding. Press save. We've got that in there. we can then go to review and we actually have, again, results for them. So like, hey, again, if this is all you care about based on the information we have about you, you're generally looking pretty good, right? We can even do a proposed plan in here. We could actually show like, hey, what if something changes in this plan? So again, I could go in, adjust something in here and say like, hey, maybe Bruce's salary is going to change quite a bit. Maybe they're just curious if they can retire early. So I'll just put in 65. This is a super basic example. Where is that? There we go. 65. Press refresh. Can see if that has a big impact on the proposed plan here. In this case, not really. They make about $1,000 less, so not really a big worry. And then I can even go over to confidence and see what that Monte Carlo looks like in the long run. So again, the point of this, and I'll quickly go through the others, but the main point I'm really trying to show you with these two is at the end of the day, this is not a full plan. This is not something where they're going to walk in and go, okay, guess I'm good. We're done with everything. This fully covered my, every financial question I could possibly have. That's not really the point. The point is you can use a fraction of the data to just get results for the client. So if they're kind of on the fence about being a full client or they're really only curious about one thing, you can still put a very simple amount of data together, especially for Social Security, it's 4 items, which is really not that intense. And then you have results for them. Very easy. Again, I won't go through every single one of these in detail. You can also do this for debt. So you can set up like credit card debt, any existing loans. There's a number, you can keep adding these, right? There's a number of different loan types in here. So you can go for mortgages, HELOCs, reverse mortgages, car loans, all sorts of stuff like that. Right. And then I could actually go to review and get an idea of what this would look like. So like, hey, if we use an avalanche strategy, maybe this would get you debt free this many months sooner and it would only cost this amount of money, things like that. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but this is another option. You also have the ability for risk. So if you just want to get their risk profile, great, you can do that as well. They just need to fill out the assessment and say what their assets are. They can also add in files to the vault. They can also use tasks as well. Now, these are all of the RightExpress options available currently. This is all of them on one plan. You can change this, right? So if I go back to the client tab here, I can go to Express Access and actually control what they can see. So I can actually take off debt and risk, press save. And then when I open the client again, these are the only ones they have available. So if they're just interested in these two, great, get them done, show them the options, they're all set, but those other ones are available as well. Now, hopefully RightExpress actually works, right? And they're like, hey, this was great. I loved how quick this was. I actually want to work with you a little bit more. I want to become a full client. If that's the case, great. You can actually switch them to full planning access from here, right? So when you're on the client tab, if I have them selected, I can go over to planning type where it says express, switch them to full planning. Now, the only thing to mention, if you switch them to full planning, you cannot go back, right? So if I have a RightExpress plan that's only for Social Security, that's all they cared about, but then they reached out and went, look, our financial situation's changed, or I'm thinking about retiring early. I need a lot more information. I want to work with you further. You can switch them to full planning, press save. It will warn you that you cannot go back to Express once you've done this. Press confirm, and then again, they're a full client. So when I open them up, there's going to be a lot more information. It will start you on the 6 steps because obviously we didn't do all of this. So for example, when I go to income, it will keep what we did, but there's certain items in here we're going to adjust, right? Like it only has generic items for savings. It doesn't really have anything for expenses. Goals as well, might need to change. You can still go into their settings and change a few things. So for example, they might start as a goal-based client, which might be too simplistic. I can go to modified cash flow based. Now I can actually go in and add things like their expenses, right? So once that's done, return to onboarding, go to expenses. I can now add in those items. So again, a lot of flexibility here. I'm not going to go in depth on every single one of these items because I do want a little bit of time for the Q&A. But the main point I'm trying to hammer in here is just there are a ton of different options with something like RightExpress. Flexibility is a main point. Whatever works for your client base, you can typically make work in the system. But that's really about it. So if I go back to the advisor portal here, just quickly to wrap up on this point. Again, we went over a lot. Specifically, we went over data importing options and just integrations in general. bringing in information that you don't want to have to just redo by hand if it's available somewhere else. That can definitely help, especially if you're a new advisor. We looked at templates. So again, there's a bunch we did not cover, but the idea being you can set up templates in advance. So when you're in the data entry process and onboarding a client, these things are already set up. Again, if you have more than a few clients being added in a short period of time, this can absolutely save you lots of time. Just making sure I know what they see from the get-go for data entry. I know what tasks will be assigned to them. I know if they're an express plan, what that looks like. Making sure that's added in from the get-go. We looked at client groups. So just making sure like, hey, you can make specific groups for specific plans. You can make sure that they have the ability to create a plan themselves, add those starting templates to a client. We looked quickly at RightFlows. So understanding that if you need something a lot more in depth than just like default tasks, for example, or a task template, you do have the option to go in and set a much more complicated set of tasks in order to make sure like, hey, if you have a larger team, if there's a lot of items you need to get through, you can definitely do that with a specific client. And lastly, maybe most importantly, we looked at the two different ways to actually add in a client, right? So we looked at just the standard version, which is adding a client using those templates. That's not too complicated, but also adding a new Express client. So making sure that, even if this is just a prospect, there are options available to them and even kind of hopefully getting them into the process of becoming a full client. So again, there's definitely more you can do. We didn't get through every single option that can possibly help with the onboarding today, but those are definitely the main ones. And hopefully, no matter where you are in your process or how long you've been with RightCapital, you found something that could be helpful.